Let's open our Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 41, verse 5, as we continue looking at this description of the temple that should have been built when the Israelis came back from Babylonian exile. Now, I know that there are several people out there that say that this is a design for the millennial temple, and I disagree with that. After the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the animal sacrifice system was rendered moot. It was no longer needed. It had already fulfilled its purposes of pointing toward the death and resurrection of Jesus. So in this Christian era, there's no need for a temple with animal sacrifices. And in the millennial period, there will be no need for a temple with animal sacrifices either. The temple building's no big deal, but animal sacrifices, not necessary anymore when Jesus Christ is right there. So I believe that this was given by God to Ezekiel to pass on to the Jewish people, to tell them this is what you need to build once you get back from exile. Now, unfortunately, they didn't do so. And so I believe they missed out on some of the blessings that are described in this last section of the book of Ezekiel during the run-up to the coming of the Messiah. And that's most unfortunate. However, I will note this. There are some elements not related to sacrificial systems that show up in the eternal kingdom descriptions in the book of Revelation, such as the river of water of life that we'll eventually get to describing here, and the presence of the eternal throne in Jerusalem. Those things, I think, will finally be realized once Jesus comes as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. One last note. As we go through this, Ezekiel has already been told that the Long Cubit is in mind. And so we've got to take that through our descriptions here. So verse number 5, he's already described the shrine area, the inner court area, and how big it is. And it's pretty good sized. And the Holy of Holies and the most holy place. Now he describes how thick the wall of the temple building is. Verse 5, he measured the wall of the temple 6 cubits thick. So that's 10 feet, 4.2 inches. The breadth of the side chambers, 4 cubits, all around the temple. Now, the original temple of Solomon and then the temple built by Zerubbabel both had this wraparound storage area. It was 3 stories tall and had all these different rooms in which things needed for temple worship could be kept close at hand. So that's what's being described now, is this 3 sides of the temple. That's on the north, west, and south sides. Storage facility. So verse 3, the side chambers were in 3 stories, one over another, 30 in each story. Probably very similar to Solomon's design. 30 rooms wrapping around on 3 sides and 3 layers of it. So a total of 90 rooms. There were offsets all around the wall of the temple to serve as supports for the side chambers so that they should not be supported by the wall of the temple. That's exactly the way it's described when Solomon builds his temple. There are walls put up against the outside of the shrine building. And these narrow walls become the support points for the cross beams of these side chambers, so that the bottom layer, the bottom rooms, are smaller than the 3rd story rooms because of these offset walls that are leaning up against the temple, because they did not want to pierce the wall of the actual shrine building, because that would not have been appropriate. It became broader as it wound upward to the side chambers because the temple was enclosed upward all around the temple. Again, as I said, the platform on which the cross beams were placed could be smaller as you went up. And thus, the temple had a broad area upwards, and so one went up from the lowest story to the top through the middle story, some sort of stairway system that went up from the first floor through the second floor to the third floor. And thus the temple had a broad area upwards, so one went up from the lowest story to the top story through the middle story. I saw also that the temple had a raised platform all around. That's what I've already described before. The temple doesn't just sit flat in all its parts, the outer court, the inner court, the actual shrine building. The shrine building is higher than all the other areas. And so there are steps that go up from the lower court to the inner court, and then from the inner court to the temple building and the storage areas. And the foundations of the side chambers measured a full reed of 6 cubits long. So this is apparently a height of just over 10 feet that we're talking about here. That the temple building was higher than the platform on which it sat. The thickness of the outer wall of the side chambers was 5 cubits. So that's a pretty thick wall, because that's about 8 3/4 feet. The free space between the side chambers of the temple and the other chambers was a breadth of 20 cubits all around the temple on every side. So the space between the storage area and the wall of the perimeter of the inner court has 20 cubits of this open area where the priests are going to do their work each day. So that's 34.5 feet. That's a good wide area to carry on your work. And the doors of the side chambers opened on the free space, one door toward the north and another door toward the south, and the breadth of the free space was 5 cubits all around. So plenty of area to work in and to access the storage rooms. Verse 12, the building that was facing the separate yard on the west was 70 cubits broad, and the wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length 90 cubits. So we're talking about the shrine area is 70 cubits across, that's north to south, so we're talking about 120 feet 9 inches. And it's 90 cubits long, and so that's 155 feet and 3 inches. And then he measured the temple 100 cubits long, and the yard and the buildings with its walls 100 cubits long, and also the breadth of the east front of the temple and the yard 100 cubits long. So the complex together is 100 cubits on every side, and so that's 172 feet and 6 inches. Then he measured the length of the building facing the yard that was on the back and its galleries on either side, 100 cubits. What we seem to be hearing described here are porticos, covered areas that allow worshipers to get in out of the sun or out of the elements whenever they come here to worship. When Herod did his expansion of the temple complex that existed in his day, the temple had been built by Zerubbabel, and Ezra and Nehemiah were also probably involved in it since they were involved in the expansion of Jerusalem. It only had a budget temple with the storage facility around it, and apparently a portico on the east side where people could gather, again, out of the sun, out of the weather, whenever they came to worship. And then there was a very basic wall around the worship area, all around the shrine building. Well, when Herod expanded it, he actually put retaining walls up to the west and the south and the east, and filled in the mountain even farther to the south. And when he got done, he had a huge worship platform around which he put porticos all around. And so he had made it even larger than Zerubbabel had made it. He made it very similar to what we're seeing described here, actually. Continuing in the second half of verse 15, the inside of the nave and the vestibules of the court, the thresholds, the narrow windows, the galleries all around the three of them opposite the threshold were paneled with wood all around from the floor up to the windows. Now the windows were covered to the space above the door, even the inner room, and on the outside. So we have paneling that is put on the inside of the building, on the shrine building, to make sure that the stones are covered up. And this is going to also allow them to carve this paneling in relief as great decoration. It was carved of cherubim, so that's four-faced, four-winged angelic beings. But since they're being shown on a wall, you can only see two of the four faces. And we'll hear that mentioned in a moment. So it's a cherubim and then a palm tree between a cherub and a cherub. Every cherub had two faces, a human face toward the palm tree on the one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. So the bull face and the eagle face can't be seen in this decoration, just the human face and the lion face. They were carved on the whole temple all around, from the floor to above the door. Cherubim and palm trees were carved similarly the wall of the nave. Now, I can't guarantee you this, but I have the impression that because this is a big building, that these palm tree carvings are actually full size, full scale. And that the cherubim are these giant figures between each of the palm trees all around the interior of the temple building. Can't prove that's the scale, but I suspect that it probably is. The doorposts of the nave were squared, and in front of the holy place was something resembling an altar of wood, 3 cubits high, so that's just a little over 5 feet, and 2 cubits long, so that's almost 3.5 feet, and 2 cubits broad, so 3.5 feet again. Its corners, its base, and its walls were of wood. And he said to me, "This is the table that is before he who is." So here is God's table in the holy place where the priests will do their work day by day. What's the table for? Well, the table was where they put the bread of the presence and the cups that held the drink offerings. The nave and the holy place each had a double door. The double doors had leaves, 2 leaves apiece, 2 swinging leaves for each door. So kind of like a bifold sort of door. And on the doors of the nave were carved cherubim and palm trees, such as were carved on the walls. And there was a canopy of wood in front of the vestibule outside. And there were narrow windows and palm trees on either side, and on the side walls of the vestibule, the side chambers of the temple, and the canopies. So there are these decorations of the angelic protecting angels, or the cherubim, all over the place, as a reminder that we are separated from God by our sin, and we cannot enter his presence. That was the whole idea of the cherubim in Scripture. The first time we meet them is in the Garden of Eden after sin. They were barring Adam and Eve and all of mankind thereafter from ever going back into the Garden of Eden and into God's presence. Their impression was woven into the tapestries of the original tabernacle and included in the Ark of the Covenant and in the water wagons. These were all reminders that these angelic beings kept us from entering the presence of the holy God unless we had gone through the sacrifice process. When the new temple was built, first by Solomon and then later by Zerubbabel and then improved upon, renovated by Herod, there was one huge veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And it was woven all over with these cherubim figures. As a reminder, our sin separates us from God. We cannot enter into His presence except by special sacrifice. Now, what happened on the day that Jesus died? After He said it was finished, after He said, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," He died, and instantly there was an earthquake, a localized earthquake, and the temple veil was ripped from top to bottom, clearly by God, opening the way back up into His presence. So the offering of Jesus allowed us now to enter into the Holy of Holies by the blood of the Lamb, slain before the foundation of the world. So there were no more barriers. The cherubim were not stopping us anymore from coming by the blood of Jesus into the presence of God. So this is another one of the reasons I don't think this is a millennial temple, because even the imagery is not needed to remind us that without animal sacrifices, you can't go into the presence of God, because all that's been resolved by Jesus. Chapter 42 starts describing the place where the priests are going to go and get things that they need and do the work that they need to do. Then He, meaning the measuring angel, led me out into the outer court toward the north. And He brought me to the chambers that were opposite the separate yard and opposite the building on the north. And the length of the building, whose door faced north, was 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 cubits. Facing the 20 cubits that belonged to the inner court, and facing the pavement that belonged to the outer court, there was a gallery against gallery in 3 stories. So this is the perimeter that goes around the inner courtyard. And apparently it is also 3 stories high. And before the chambers was a passage inward, 10 cubits wide, 100 cubits long, and their doors were on the north. And we've seen these measurements before, so I'm not going to keep repeating them. Now the upper chambers were narrow, for the galleries took more away from them than the lower and the middle chambers on the of the building. For there were in 3 stories, and they had no pillars like the pillars of the courts. Thus the upper chambers were set back from the ground more than the lower and the middle ones. So they're basically stacked up, so that the lower walls are kind of supporting the next story up by an inset of that next story up, and then the next one after that is also the same thing. There was a wall outside parallel to the chambers toward the outer court, opposite the chambers, 50 cubits long. For the chambers in the outer court were 50 cubits long, while those opposite the nave were 100 cubits long. And below these chambers was an entrance on the east side as one enters them from the outer court. I should remind you here, the difference between the outer court and the inner court. In the Solomon temple, in the Zerubbabel temple, in the Jerusalem temple of Herod, was that anyone could enter the outer court, Jew or Gentile, and worship from there. If you were ceremonially unclean, you could remain in the outer court and worship. Only people that were ceremonially clean could go into the inner court and meet with the priests as the closest point of worship. So what we're seeing here is the same sort of distinction between the inner ring or the inner circle of the shrine building and the outer court where everybody could go. Verse 10, in the thickness of the wall of the court on the south, also opposite the yard and opposite the building, there were chambers with a passage in front of them. They were similar to the chambers of the north. So basically, the south side is just like the north side. Verse 13, then he said to me, the north chambers and the south chambers opposite the yard are the holy chambers where the priests who approach he who is shall eat the most holy offerings. There they shall put the most holy offerings, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter the holy place, they shall not go out of it into the outer court without laying there the garments in which they minister, for these are holy. They shall put on other garments before they go near to that which is for the people. So, this is the termination point for the priests. If they go beyond this termination wall, they have to take off their holy garments and put on their normal workaday secular clothing. And then if they come back in, they have to reverse the process, take off their secular type clothing and put on their holy garments. So this is the termination point where that has to happen. It's also where they have to eat any of the holy foods inside this perimeter area. Verse 15, now when he had finished measuring the interior of the temple area, he led me by the gate that faced east and measured the temple all around. He measured the east side with the measuring reed, 500 cubits by the measuring reed all around. Using our long cubit measurement, that is 862 and a half feet. So that's a pretty good long distance. And then it says next that he measured the south side, comes up with the same measurement. The west side, same measurement. All four sides, they had a wall around it, 500 cubits long, 500 cubits broad to make a separation between the holy and the common. So this is the perimeter wall for the temple complex. And it's actually just a little bit smaller than the Temple Mount that you see today, that Herod put in place. So Herod made it a little bit bigger than what is here in the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 43. Then he led me to the gate facing east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. Now, this is where it gets exciting. Because Ezekiel, the last time he had been brought supernaturally to Jerusalem, he was shown God abandoning the temple before it was destroyed. So he saw the glory of God get up off the Ark of the Covenant, come out the front door and be on the porch, and then go past the altar, and then over to the east gate, and then disappear across the Kidron Valley and over the Mount of Olives. Gone. And then the judgment fell upon the temple and the city, and it was destroyed. So that's what he saw last time that he was here. This time he sees the reverse happen. So the implication is, if the people will just trust God and follow his instructions and build this temple complex, whenever they come back from Babylonian exile, God will come back into the building. And so that's what he sees. Behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I saw when he came to destroy the city, just like the vision I had by the Kibar Canal. And I fell on my face as the glory of he who is entered the temple by the gate facing east. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of he who has filled the temple. And when the man was standing beside me, or while the man was standing beside me, I heard one speaking to me out of the temple. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. And the house of Israel shall no more defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their whoring, by the dead bodies of their kings in their high places, by setting their threshold by my threshold, their doorpost beside my doorposts, with only a wall between me and them. They've defiled my holy name by their abominations which they've committed, so I've consumed them in my anger. Now, let them put their whoring and dead bodies of their kings far from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever. Notice the conditionality of it. As for you, son of man, describe to the house of Israel the temple, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and they shall measure the plan. And if they are ashamed of all that they've done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangements, its exits, its entrances, that is, its whole design. Make known to them as well as its statutes, its whole design, and all its laws. Write it down in their sight, so that they may observe all its laws, all its statutes, and carry them out. This is the law of the temple. The whole territory of the top of the mountain, all around it, shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the temple. So Ezekiel offers to the people the chance of God coming back and re-inhabiting a rebuilt temple. Unfortunately, they don't do it. When we're back together again on Monday, I'll talk more at length about that reality.